Prologue. Gojii, Ylewood. A sharp stone lodged deep into a candlestick fell onto the brass candelabra as soon as the wax covering its top melted away. The tiny flame that was barely breathing extinguished as Evore's nectar-colored eyes opened to his bedroom, faintly lit by a pale morning glow shining through a square-shaped window. He rose from his bed. Its outer frame was a tree trunk carefully hollowed before it was bleached white, and the mattress was filled with feathers. Evore reached his hands up to the short, pointed ceiling and stretched, standing upon his toes. The boy of 10 loved the feeling of a good morning stretch and swore that, sometimes after a good long one, he felt himself grow taller. Still barely able to keep his eyes open, Evore's bare feet slid across the floor of his chamber to a large, coffee-colored wooden chest. While the trunk looked rather plain from a distance, a closer examination showed a curved eye intricately carved in the top. One side of the pupil had a sun, and the other a crescent moon. Unlocking the brass clasp, he sleepily opened it, releasing a strong scent of cedar wood through his nostrils, which woke him up just as much as his morning alarm. The boy tossed blankets and wrinkled corset trousers onto the floor, eventually pulling out a pair of forest green leggings that he slipped over his skinny bare legs. He wrapped himself in a sand-colored robe, fastened it with a leather belt, and made for the door. Evore's dome-shaped bedchamber was separated from the rest of the tree hut by a thin, winding staircase that curled through the branches of the great oak it was built upon. Every story stood on a wooden platform that rested on the tree's arms, each strong as steel. When his father, Onexus, the chief of his people, constructed the bedroom, it frightened Evore. No longer could he sneak into his parents' quarters when the wind screamed through the leaves or when the branches groaned. His father told him that the trees were the guardians of the Verrativas, and just as the mortals didn't fear their armored protectors, neither should he. "It's not the trees that scare me," he whimpered. "Just the height." Onexus laughed heartily at this, patting his son hard on the back. "Height is the weapon of a tree. You want your guardian to wield something fierce to protect your life." As the morning air brushed against his fair skin, he felt the wind dance through his robe and out of his baggy sleeves. Most times, Evore would land on the bottom of the spiral staircase after 2 leaps, but not today. Today, he walked gingerly down each step, the wood creaking under his bare feet and echoing through the tree. It felt as though there were hundreds of stairs, maybe thousands. When Evore reached the bottom of the staircase, he pushed in the circular mahogany door which led inside to the much larger tree hut. As soon as he crossed the threshold, his mother greeted him with a smile warmer than the sun. The window, which was almost the size of the apple-red wall it was cut into, let in just enough sunlight that it seemed to illuminate the woman. She began to stir a small cauldron that hung over an open fire, its flames skinny orange fingers tickling the sides of the pot. The abode was one large room, which had a sleeping area in one corner, a kitchen by the back door, and a study in the front. Emery spooned a ladle of oats from the cauldron into a small clay bowl and placed it in front of her son as he sat down at a round table. Evore reached into a larger wooden bowl and pulled out a handful of berries. "How many times must I tell you to use a spoon?" Emery questioned. "I don't know where your hands have been." She sat at the opposite end of the boy with a steaming mug of tea to watch him eat his breakfast. Her hair was chestnut brown, the same as his, but while Evore's was curly and unruly, Emery's laid straight down her back. She was clad in a vibrant silk robe of emerald green that had a tree trunk stitched down the back. Bare branches spread from it and crept over her shoulders onto the front of the garment. "Eat, child. You'll need your strength for today." Emery's voice was tender, but had a sense of urgency to it. Evore stirred the raspberries and blueberries into his oats until it was pink as the sky at sunrise. His insides turned and his throat tightened as he swallowed the first spoonful. "I'm not hungry." He frowned at the bowl and dropped the spoon onto the table. He couldn't remember the last time he didn't want to eat his sweetened oats, but knew that if he had taken another bite, his stomach would send it right back up to him. Standing from her seat, Emery glided over to Evore, and with her right hand she gently massaged his shoulder. As she ran her fingers through his tangled forest of curls, Emery found her warm smile once again. "It's okay, baby. It'll all be over soon." "I'm not a baby," Evore whined, pulling himself away from his mother's embrace. How could she say that? Today is my test to become a man. No. Today is my test to become a true Verrativa. How many Verrativas are still called baby by their mothers? Emery sat back down in front of him. "No, of course you're not. I'm sorry, love. I still see my newborn whenever I look into your eyes. Your father placed you in my arms kicking and screaming, and now you're off to take your first test." Tears began to well in Evore's eyes. "What if I can't?" "You can. You're Evore, son of Onexus, chief of the Verrativas." The tears began to fall down his cheeks, and he tasted their salt as they ran over his lips. "I just need to know that you and Father will you still love me if I fail?" He sobbed into his sleeve, and Emery wiped a tear away with the back of her hand. "It's not like we have much of a choice in the matter, now do we?" she lovingly joked, and watched a smile curl on Evore's tear-stained face. "It's natural to worry about failing, child. Remember, though, thinking about failure won't help you succeed." He sniffed and nodded in agreement. Emery took a sip of tea from her mug. "Now, eat your breakfast." After Evore's stomach allowed a few more bites out of respect for his mother, he knew procrastination was no longer an option. "Where's Father? I thought he'd be coming with me." "Your father is busy picking and burning shy aconite. He will meet you at the iron ash tree." Father is always burning shy aconite. Evore didn't respond to his mother, but instead stepped away from the kitchen table and into Chief Onexus's study. The study had always fascinated him, even before he was able to read. On top of a chair carved in the fashion of an oak tree laid a book that his father would joke weighed more than Evore. Trilon, The History and the Magic of the Three Realms. It was open to his favorite page, the colored map of the entire world. Traced his middle finger over the Moira Sea, which separated the Ylewood from the rest of the western realm of Gojii. Will I ever leave the Ylewood? As Evore wondered to himself, his eyes went to the top of the map, where Sorfos should have been located. That was where the oracles lived in seclusion from the rest of the world to practice their banned magic. His father would tell him stories that before Tanwil Embre took Trilon, the oracles lived in the capital province, Relis, and helped King Zabkar Inwar rule. Set loose upon the kingdom, the oracles used their power as a way to intimidate the men and women of every realm and made Trilon a world built on fear and despair. Rebellion follows tyranny, much like the moon follows the sun. Onexus explained. Trilon needed a new leader, someone without the gift of magic. Tanwil Embre gathered armies from both Gojii and the eastern realm of Valero to put an end to the hostility that King Zabkar had created. When he approached Onexus to ask for aid in the battle, he declined at first, but Tanwil made him a promise that he couldn't refuse. Now Zabkar was dead, the oracles banished to their snow-capped mountains of Sorfrost, and King Tanwil ruled over Trilon. Whenever Evore asked his father what that pact was, Onexus always refused to answer, but would promise to tell him when the time is right. Forbath was where Evore wanted to travel the most. He wanted to go to Gordon, to watch the blacksmiths forge swords and shields and eat fresh fish from Yatorga, which he read was the most delicious in the entire world. Most of all, he wanted to go to Release. Not only was Larkmore Castle there, but it was also where the Coatuses were trained. They were magnificent winged creatures that had a scaly torso, feathered wings, an oddly long neck, and a beak that was typically striped with a sunflower yellow and indigo blue. Altogether, there were 3 Coatuses known as the Sisters, each one taking care of their own realm. There was Akupara in Forbath, who was said to be larger than Larkmore Castle, then Siester in Aleru, who was quick and the color of ice, and finally, the Coatus of the West, Naitea. Evore's father had always shown him the moon and would tell Evore to wish upon it, and every time the boy had wished for a flight upon Naitea. Although Evore had never actually seen a Coatus, the history and the magic of the 3 realms showed countless pictures of the 3 sisters, which allowed him to draw a few of his own. After Tanville defeated in war, he was greeted with 3 eggs, and when they hatched, the new king realized that these creatures could either destroy Trilon or make it a better place. After the sisters were fully grown and trained, many other animals fled from fear, even though the Coatuses were peaceful and ate a vegetarian diet. 2 men, Lerode Allwater and Vengar Stoneburner, harnessed their aggression before setting up a trainers guild in Release that taught a chosen 3 to ride the Coatuses in an effort to transport both goods and people all through Trilon. Evore would beg his father to let him come with him on one of his trips to Forbath so he could see the guild, speak with Allwater or Stoneburner, and maybe ride on a Coatus like the rest of the inhabitants of Trilon. But he was never able to convince him. A long piece of parchment, which Evore hadn't noticed in his previous reads, was sticking out towards the end of the book. He pulled it out and saw that it was a letter. Dear Onexus, Chief of the Verrativas, we have received your inquiry for a time where you can join us in Release and meet with King Tanville as well as his cabinet. We understand the relationship that you hold with the King of Trilon, and that you believe face-to-face meetings are vital to not only keeping you, but your entire race safe. However, as the King's cabinet, we believe that traveling from the Ylewood all the way to the Southern Realm puts your life at risk, which, in turn, endangers all the lives of the entire Verrativa race. For your information, the King is busy with a new breakthrough discovery by Sage Lerode Allwater. Using science, our royal sage has found a way to create 2 Coatus eggs, one of which has already hatched. Master Vengar Stoneburner has been working tirelessly with the trainees to assure that the Coatuses will be tamed in a timely manner. When King Tanville finds it necessary to contact you, he will send another letter to one of the designated areas that we have discussed. Until then, please be safe and know that our King sends his love and blessings to you and your people. Sincerely yours, Brannon Broadwine, lead confidant for King Tanville. Forbath, Release. At the bottom of the letter was a simply drawn Coatus, which Evore assumed was Akupara. Evore's heart fluttered like he was just given his Nason's Day present. Another Coatus? He couldn't help but scream out loud. This has to be a gift from King Tanville to my father. After all, they are best friends. Are you still here? Emery squealed when she saw her son in the study. Get out! You were late when you woke up this morning. She pushed her son out the door and, running down the staircase until it ended, he grabbed onto the tree's trunk to climb to the ground. While most lands had villages with rows of cottages, the Verrativas built all of their homes in the trees. No tree huts were ever visible to the naked eye, nor were they ever built next to another. His father always told him that being hidden in plain view was the only way, because your enemies would never know where to look. The dirt path that Evore followed winded to the left, then the right, while a wall of trees on either side made the morning seem darker than it already was. Although the road was littered with roots, rocks, and small holes, and was wide enough for two to walk abreast, the twists and turns made it seem quite narrow. As the path dipped down, part of it veered to the right, leading to a grassy overhang. Evore spent most of his 10 years at this mossy jut. Without any real friends, he would sit, his feet dangling over the edge, and imagine the world outside of the woodlands he called home. Most recently, Evore would borrow books from his father's study and read them at the overhang. He knew all the rules to shinty, horseshoes, and knucklebones, but never actually played any of them. Sometimes, Evore would close his eyes at the overhang and imagine boys and girls dancing and carelessly kicking up dirt into the air, calling out for him to join. Continuing on down the small hill, the trees opened up to let in an even smaller lake, its waters open arms inviting him for an embrace. Evore wanted nothing more than to kick off his shoes, remove his robes, and swim his worries away. A wooden bridge was built over the middle of Lake Geller to get across, rather than wrestling with the endless sea of trees around the perimeter. Gnarled banisters were thick tree branches, carved and shaved down, smoothed, and painted crimson red. Before Evore made for the bridge, he cupped both hands into the lake and drank as much as he could hold before the water trickled through his fingers. The coolness of the liquid felt soothing down his throat and gave him some much-needed energy that he didn't receive when he refused his breakfast. Suddenly, the middle of the water began to stir and bubble slowly as if it was starting to boil. Evore ran to the middle of the bridge to get a better look when a head and shoulders popped out. The girl's hair was long and black as a cauldron. She looked up toward Evore, whose jaw was in desperate need of picking up, and she smiled the most beautiful smile he had ever seen. Although she was older than Evore, she couldn't have been more than 14 years of age. "Hello up there." Her bare breasts bobbed in and out of the young boy's sight. "Are you all right?" she asked, knowing exactly what his eyes were focused on. Evore nodded. "I'm just going..." "You're going to the iron ash tree, aren't you?" the girl asked, water dripping from her hair onto her suntanned shoulders. "I am." Evore perked up. "Today is my..." "I know who you are, Evore. Your father rules the Ylewood. It's hard to not know you." She laughed. He tried to laugh with her, but what came out sounded like a mix between a yell and a cough. "My name is Tawani. I live in the tallest tree near the overhang." Her yellow eyes distracted Evore. They were the same color as his, and the rest of the Verrativas, but her eyes made him forget everything that was wrong in his life. She smiled again at him. "Better get going. It'd be hard for them to start without you." Evore's head came crashing down from the clouds like a meteor. Nice to meet you," he awkwardly choked out before almost tripping over his own feet. "You too, future chief." Tawani dipped back under the water, and Lake Geller was still once again. When Evore hopped off the bridge and back onto the path, the trees swallowed up the sunlight, and for a mile, Evore wasn't able to tell if it was day or night. He heard the creaks and groans from the branches, and for a split second, he thought of turning around. Trees are the guardians of the Verrativas. He began to run, so fast that he swore his feet didn't touch the ground. Faster, faster, faster. A tree root grabbed onto his foot, sending him flailing to the ground. As he wiped the dirt from the front of his robe, Evore realized that he had finally made it. The trees sectioned off left and right, like soldiers marching in formation to allow space for their captain. 4 hooded men stood around the base of the iron ash tree, but didn't even acknowledge that Evore had arrived. They were all clad in the same robes, green as the leaves of the tree they surrounded. Each one held a lit torch, their flames standing idle as if they were waiting on instruction. Evore looked up to the great tree and felt goosebumps grow when he realized the top was not in sight. The tree had too many arms to count, but the boy knew that he would most likely have to use every single one. This was his time to prove he was worthy of being Onyx's heir and the future chief of the Verrativas. If he couldn't make the climb, he could always spend the rest of eternity burning Shialkanite for his father. No, thinking about failure won't help you succeed. The first branch hung quite low, and Evore was able to jump up and grab it with both arms. Once he hoisted himself up and stood, the 4 Verrativas below began to chant together.
Kings will rise,
kings will fall. The sands of time will cover them all.
Ghosts crave blood.
Potions made from mud.
Shadows only lie.
Fire can help those fly.
But when the rest are gone,
The Verrativas will live on. Evore climbed to the next branch, then straddled the trunk and stepped through to the opposite side. The iron ash's leaves began to swallow him whole, and the trees seemed much smaller. He noticed that the branch above him was easy to grasp, but the one above that was significantly higher and out of his reach. There was a branch straight ahead of the one that he could reach, but it was lower than the one he was already standing on. However, the lower branch had a few more arms above it that made for a much easier climb. Reaching up to the branch above him, Evore began to swing the rest of his body to make the leap to the lower level. It took 3 swings for him to muster up the courage to let go, but by that time his body was moving quite fast. He went flying, feet first, smashing his bottom onto the branch, and he was falling. At the last moment, his left hand grabbed onto the branch. Dangling from the branch, he was able to grasp the other side with his right hand and pull himself up. From there, he climbed up a few more feet without any problem. Evore still heard the muttered chant from the Verrativas, but when he looked down, he was barely able to tell that there were people below. He crossed over the trunk once again and pulled himself up another branch when he heard a noise that almost sounded like the iron ash tree was complaining. Trees are the guardians of the tree bark splintered and broke off to fall back down to the ground. For a moment, Evore's body felt frozen in midair, and then, as time sped up, so did he. Grabbing and clawing onto anything, Evore tried to save himself, but every handful was either air or leaves. His head smashed against a branch, sending a high-pitched whistle through his ears, and he finally grabbed onto the tree trunk out of desperation. Just like that, Evore was no longer falling, and he was as confused as he was relieved. His fingernails had grown pointy and long and stuck deep into the trunk, but when he removed one hand from the tree, it shrunk back down to the normal size and shape. Evore continued this motion 3 times over just to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. How had they never noticed this ability? Why would Father hide this from me? Blood was leaking from his nose like a broken basin, but he continued his ascent to the top. It was significantly easier to climb up this way, rather than hop up and guess which branch to swing to next. It was closing in on midday when Evore realized that his new strategy may have required less thinking, but it was much more physical strength. His biceps were on fire and his hands ached, like someone was stepping on each finger individually. He looked to the right and saw a sturdy branch where he stopped to rest for a moment. Dried blood was caked under his nose and easily cleaned off, but Evore's arms were too fatigued to continue on the trunk. After a few more twists and turns through the iron ashes maze, he noticed a stream of light shining through the leaves. Clawing and grabbing, the boy made his way to the source and stuck his head through and felt a breeze blow hope back into his system. "You finally made it up," a voice called from beyond the layer of leaves and twigs. Evore began to push through and stepped out onto the iron ash tree's tallest and strongest arm, where he saw his father. "Thought you weren't going to make it." Onexus pushed his son's hair out of his eyes. The man was tall and muscular, with a head of long, chocolate-colored hair. He was clad in a pair of navy leggings and a honey-yellow robe, tied at the waist. His chest was exposed, which was tattooed with a great tree. The branches spread far along his upper body, covering every area that was visible. Around his neck hung a thin chain with a small horn attached to it. "I fell once," Evore said, wiping the blood from his face. Onexus laughed. "You're here now, though, son." The boy shook his head. "Father, something happened to me. My fingers, they..." "Your claws came out. That's good. As Verrativas, our claws come out when our lives are in danger. It's part of what makes us who we are." Evore stared at his fingertips. "Only when we're in danger?" "That's right," his father smiled. "So, let's say someone was trying to kill us. Would they come out?" Onexus grimaced. "Who's trying to kill us?" The boy shrugged. "Evore, no one will hurt us here. I've made sure of that." He grabbed his son by the shoulder and walked him out to the ledge of the branch. "See that sea down there? Do you know what it is?" He pointed in the distance. "The Moira Sea. I read it in..." "Trilon, the history and the magic of the three realms. I know." His father smiled at his son. "Do you know why no one has tried to cross the Moira Sea?" Evore shook his head. "No, I don't, but I've always wondered why no one has tried to come over from the other side. Is the seawater keeping our people safe?" Evore's curiosity was piquing. His father nodded. "When you're ready, I'll show you the sea. Mortals want us dead, Evore, and nothing will stop them. They're a race that desires what they don't have. Mortals will even kill their own kind if it means getting closer to what they want." "Oh, and what's that?" "Our gift." Evore looked out to the never-ending landscape of greens and blues. "So how did we cross the Moira Sea?" "When King Tanwell asked for my aid to take Willis, he promised me protection for the Verrativa race and flew us into the Ylewood on Coatus. We lost a lot of good men in the battle to help the human crown a new king, but it's hard for me to regret it, because you're safe." "Will I ever ride a Coatus like you did?" Evore couldn't contain his excitement. "Pray that you don't, good boy. A Coatus ride for us only means danger, but know that we're safe. Also know that, if we are in true danger, not falling out of a tree danger, King Tanwell gave me this." Onexus grabbed a small, bone-colored horn around his neck. It was small, starting out thin at the bottom and opening up wide at the top. "This will save us." Evore grabbed the rather plain, colorless horn, which looked more like a shell than an instrument that could produce any sound. It was smooth to the touch, and made of what seemed to be ivory or bone. But for a gift from the King of Trilon, it seemed rather boring. What does it do? "You're more obsessed with Coatuses than Master Vengar Stoneburner, yet you don't know what a Coatus horn is?" His father stood abruptly. "There will come a time to answer all of your questions, Evore. That time is not while we're standing atop the tallest tree in Trilon." Evore looked down from the edge of the iron ash. He gulped anxiously when he realized that most of what he was looking down upon were the tops of trees. Squinting, the boy thought he saw the four-hooded Verrativas, but they just looked like ants from this height. "I'm not sure." As much as he didn't want to let his father down, the idea of jumping made him want to curl next to his mother and sleep his troubles away. "You're on top of the world right now, my boy. You always say you're jealous of the mortals in the other realms. How many of them could say that they've been on top of the tallest tree in Trilon?" Onexus's hair danced in the wind, grazing Evore's shoulder. "You're right, but..." "But nothing," Onexus interrupted. "You'll never be ready for this. No one is. This isn't about being ready. It's about conquering fear. It's about being your own master and only relying on yourself. Evore stepped to the very edge. Can we trust anybody else? Never, his father answered without hesitation. Evore didn't remember when he stepped off the branch, but for a moment he felt weightless. His eyes watered, but he couldn't close them, and his mop of hair flew above him and looked as if it was hanging on for dear life. The boy's arms grabbed at air, and his legs kicked until he heard a low murmur from the 4 men below. When his feet hit the ground, he fell immediately. A burning sensation, strong as fire, filled his chest and flew through the furnace that was his body, and Evore thought he would never stand again. Then the pain left him, and he stood up, as if waking from a nap. As his eyes and ears came into focus, he saw the 4 hooded Verrativas and heard their chant.
Kings will rise,
Kings will fall. The sands of time will cover them all.
Ghosts crave blood.
Potions made from mud.
Shadows only lie.
Fire can help those fly.
But when the rest are gone,
The Verrativas will live on.